Hi folks, it is B from B Recovers from Binging, and today I'm coming with a book review. I have tried to film this book review about 39,000 times. Somebody's always waking up from their nap super early or running in naked to tell me something. So we'll see if we can actually get through this one. There will probably be a rotating cast of characters. So this review is about Anti-Diet, a new book from Christy Harrison. Christy Harrison, for those not familiar, also has a podcast called Psych and an online support community for learning about intuitive eating. So that is how I found out. I'm gonna get comfy. That's how I found out about this book, and I've been listening to Christy, I guess, for about 5-6 months now, and I'll start with saying this is going to be, I'm trying to do as unbiased a review as possible, but just like her podcast, just like her in general, I feel like I'm just gonna go fangirl here, but the book was fabulous. Like, there's only one critique I have, and I'll get into that, but it's an amazing book, and I think it's a great way to spend your coin and in support of somebody who's really making a big difference in terms of the intuitive eating, health at every size, and anti-diet community, and getting that message out there. She's doing a great job. So I'm going to get into the meat of my review and kind of take it a little bit chapter by chapter, but not so intensely so. I listened to it by Audible, as anyone who follows this channel, the ones of you. I have little people, and I didn't want to be like, I've got notes too, I didn't want to be like all in the book reading it and kind of ignoring them and their needs, because I know I'm a book bug. So I was listening to it in one ear, and I have to say that was an interesting experience, because it's so emotional, you know, like you go on an emotional roller coaster. So there was some sadness, there was some laughs, but a lot of sadness, and then anger, good anger, you know, healing sadness. But for some reason, I think maybe listening to it intensified those feelings. So just, you know, a warning. So one of the first things that I wanted to acknowledge was that Christy really does give props to her female forebears in feminism. So you will hear her referencing people like Laura Fraser, Naomi Wolf, Betty Friedan. She uses some wonderful bell hooks quotes in there, and Audre Lorde. No, it's an Audre Lorde quote, not bell hooks. I actually would like to see I would have wanted to have seen a little bell hooks and Roxane Gay in there. I feel like they both have a lot to say about the diet culture from a Black female perspective. Other than that though, like it's all in there. And what I love about that is that she paints then the history of dieting. And as someone who, again, you know, I'm 43, well, I'll be 43 in August, so I can say 43. This isn't my first time at the rodeo, and to me, fat and feminism have always had, you know, an overlap, and I've been a feminist since I was born. So I've read Betty Friedan, I read Naomi Wolf all the way back in the day. I've read all of those authors, and it would piss me off if a newer author came along and didn't reference those wonderful, smart women who had sort of paved the way for this. So love that. And I love the fact that she provides all of the history of dieting in context to that information, but digs a little deeper. And one of the things that she digs a little deeper on is the racial aspect of it. And I always felt like that was a missing piece and an unacknowledged piece from white female feminists, that basically the underlying ethos in terms of female fatness was that if you are a fat white woman, you're not civilized. White women are supposed to be tall and thin and hardworking, you know, like this is that Protestant idea, unfeeling, blah, 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 blah. Fat people are Black, they're emotional, they're all over the place, they're lazy. So I really appreciated the fact that there was that history aspect of it, that, you know, it has a lot to do with racism, and how women who are Black and a larger body size are even further marginalized and have a completely different experience. So I really love that piece of it. And also, like, you can't talk about culture and history and weight and diets and turning people into an other or a them without talking about race in this country. Like, This book is primarily for people from a North American background or European, but these are the little, she talks about the little unspoken tensions within our society, and I really like that because our bodies are how we express those tensions. So one of the other great things that Christy has done here is she has scienced the fuck out of it, and like, kudos. You know, we can all easily state that 95% of diets don't work, and I think most of us have a good amount of information about the Minnesota experiment, the starvation experiment in 1945 at the end of World War II. And we have a good, or at least like, even if you just kind of come into this, you would have an understanding of these things from popular culture. A good understanding that diets don't work because they force your body into a starvation mode. But most of us probably don't know the deeper level of science in that, and all of the other studies that back that up. And so Christy does a really good job of taking all of that information and putting it into really easy to understand information and language while still keeping the core intent of the science and the research intact, so that there's not, it's dumbed down for lack of a better word, but it's not, the science isn't watered down. And I think it's really helpful for people like myself, and I plan on kind of digging into those new stats. In another role in life, I've mentioned this before, and I swear to God I will get to it at some point. I did work in the eating disorder world, and at that time in my role, I needed to be able to pull out stats and information really easily, and in order to refute arguments about why diets do or don't work, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I like having all of that kind of information right at, on the tip of my tongue for two reasons. One, to be able to say it to someone else, but more importantly, to tell myself, because it's like I forget. I think anyone can relate to that, like the head and the heart, constantly at war with this eating disorder, disordered eating, intuitive eating, binge eating kind of cycle. Your head knows that this is some bullshit, but your heart keeps wanting to try to go back to the diet. So I like being able to have that information to sort of refute my own claims. One of the other things that Christy refutes is the idea of food addiction and sugar addiction, which is something I'm like, thank you. I don't believe in the idea of food addiction. As someone who is an alcoholic and has been sober for many years, and has been around people who have gone through recovery from alcoholism, and I went the AA method. There's other ways of doing it, but we all consider ourselves in AA. We're always addicts, and that's why we never can drink again. And what the research shows is that alcohol has a different effect on your brain than food. Yes, there is some dopamine and pleasure centers that get lit up and everything with sugar, but it's different. It's not an addiction. Your body is supposed to eat all the time. It's an addiction, I think, to dieting and to the diet, binge, restrict, and shame cycle that many of us are addicted to, myself included. As someone who is an actual addict in terms of food, in terms of alcohol, and I can compare it to my food relationship, I always say that it was actually easier to recover from alcoholism, way easier, than it was to deal with my food issues. And that's because I can stop drinking alcohol. You can't stop eating food. One of the other things that she talks about is the deprivation mindset, which is so, that's me. Like when I was a kid, we were really, really, really poor, like really, really, really poor. And when we would get some sort of like treat, my sister and I, let's say my mom bought like a Snickers bar or something like that, which my mother had really bad diet mentality, body image stuff, so that almost never happened. My sister and I would literally break out a ruler and like measure it, because God forbid she could get like a millimeter more than me or a centimeter more than me. Like that's not happening. So I have this huge sense of deprivation, like it's always my last meal. And I really love the discussion around that, because I think a lot of us deal with that. Now, getting into the emotional side of it, for the first couple of days I was really kind of depressed. I think it took me 3-4 days to listen to it in big clumps. I was very depressed, and that depression was anger turned inward toward myself, which is so me. Why turn it out towards the world when I can turn it out to myself? Because that's helpful. And then I realized, oh, what I'm feeling is anger about all the time and energy that I've wasted on trying to control food when food was never really needed to be controlled. So went through that, then felt some anger. The anger felt good, and then kind of, yeah, I think you just kind of go on a bit of an emotional journey, but I think that's all healing. Like, I know for me it is, and I'm going to be doing an update video soon and kind of getting into some of the back and forth of doing something like this, the intuitive eating all in idea. But I think feeling those feelings, figuring them out, and honoring and acknowledging them is the only way to do it. So in terms of what I thought was missing from the book, the biggest piece was the nitty-gritty of how to eat intuitively. I think that, like, it should be obvious what intuitive eating is. I mean, I've kind of joked around about this before. You eat, you stop, it's good. But I think a lot of us would have liked Christy's version of intuitive eating. I will be doing a book review on the book Intuitive Eating, but there is a lack of, like, yes, the intuitive eating book is the quote-unquote Bible, but even the people who use it, practitioners who use it, are like, this chapter is problematic, this principle is problematic, this, like, there's so many things that are actually, and I'm reading it right now and I'm totally triggered and pissed off by it, and these are the pieces. I'll go back and look and someone will say, yeah, principle 7, kind of like take the first part and then ignore the second part of the sentence, and that's like seems to be across the board what everyone says about a lot of the materials out there for intuitive eating. There is nothing out there that really gets into the nitty-gritty without some of the layers of judgment, and it's like I understand that the authors have evolved, and right, like I think it was published in 94 or 97, but I think what we need a manual that like almost everyone can agree on. This is how intuitive eating is done without all the layers of judgment and extra layers of diet culture and diet mentality. And I would have loved to have seen more of that from Christy, because I think that I personally really enjoy her style, and she's got a huge following because people like and trust and can sense that compassion and knowledge from her. And I would have liked a little bit more information about how to eat intuitively. Maybe that's her next book, hopefully. And the last thing I really wanted to end with was, oh my god, it's already 13 minutes. The last thing I really wanted to end with on this review is, I wish doctors would read this book, listen to this book. I think that would create such a sea change if even like 10% of doctors kind of open their minds and their hearts to this information. I think it would be very brave on their part to admit that they don't actually have the right to be nutritionally counseling anyone, or the right to be telling people to go on diets. They don't. They receive like 2-3 hours, maybe 8 to 10 hours nowadays, or even, let's even say 12 hours of nutritional information and education, and yet they get to make decisions about your health based on a very limited amount of education, which they then supplement with pop cultural information that they get, like the rest of us, from janky magazine articles. That's not good healthcare, and they're supposed to do no harm, and they really are doing a lot of harm. And I think if doctors, and I don't say that like to be mean to doctors, to diss them, they're amazing. I'm all for Western medicine. I'm all for complementary and integrative medicine, as long as it's not like goop style. But imagine the difference it would make if there was neutrality about weight when you went into your doctor's office for anyone of any size,